All right, welcome to another episode of Reimagine with David Harold, the podcast and the Instagram site, Reimagine the 1 Minute Bible. I am once again in my car because I just recorded this video and it was out in the wind. It's a very cold, windy winter day in Las Vegas, so I had to bring it inside. What I want to talk about real quick is an overview of the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, because I promised that from the beginning of the podcast, and that, we did Romans in the Instagram site, and that went fairly well. So I just want to give an overview of the book of Hebrews because I really like it, and I think it's fairly misunderstood. And I would like us, as people who like God and like the Bible, to hopefully be a little more accurate about this. So the book of Hebrews is in the title. It's a letter to the Hebrews. So that is ethnic Hebrew people are the intended audience. And in this specific case of these letters, there were people who were ethnic Hebrews, who are in these communities that were deciding that that God had pretty much ended the law of Moses, the theocratic law of Moses, and that things were now being shifted to freedom in Christ, that God had done this. Now the way that God related to humanity was through this new covenant, freedom in Christ. Now, so you have a split in the community. You have Hebrew people that are the Jesus freedom likers, the freedom in Jesus likers on one side, and then you have those who still thought that the theocratic law system should hold, because the old covenant theocratic law system did have as one of its tenets that anybody who was trying to disrupt it or go against the law system, it was pretty much punishable by death. This was rough. This is why Paul persecuted people in the Jesus movement sect of the Hebrews, because it was splintering the tribe away from the law. And the consequences of the law contract, God said, if you follow the law, I'll do good things for you. And if you don't, you'll get curses. So anybody breaking away from the law system was endangering the national security of the tribe. This is difficult. Now, that seems totally reasonable if you're Paul before he was, got into Jesus. Like, they're following what they're supposed to do. This is national security. This is God saying you need to do this. So then somebody's going to come along and say that, some splinter Jewish rabbi guy died on a cross and that's God. And so now this is what we should follow. That's crazy. So the writer of, so the Jesus liking Hebrew people in these communities were being persecuted by the law liking people. And for good reason, they were persecuting them, like we just talked about, but they were being persecuted. So this, whoever wrote Hebrews, and it's disputed, is writing to make an argument to, on the one hand, like, there's two things going on in the book of Hebrews. On the one hand, he wrote, it's probably a him, maybe it's a her. On the one hand, writing to the law-liking Hebrews, giving them a massive argument for why Jesus really was God, and that God really did change things from the law system to this Jesus freedom system, the old covenant to the new covenant, made a massive theological argument using tons of Old Testament stuff to make the argument. And hopefully it's persuasive. And on the other side, the other half of what Hebrews is about is the author shoring up and encouraging those Jesus-liking Hebrew people that have kind of broken away from the law, that they are on the right track, and to stay firm, to stand where they're at, to stay in grace and not fall from grace, to not fall back into the law, to stay in their freedom, to not capitulate under the persecution, to endure it, to stand their ground, basically, to use a cliche that's become not so good in America. So hopefully you can understand what I'm saying there. This is to stay by their principles of freedom in Christ, because God rose Christ from the dead, etc., etc. This is what's going on in Hebrews. This is not a direct communication to Gentiles. It is a letter to the Hebrews. As Gentiles, we're looking into the family that we've been adopted and grafted into. This is their working out. This is them working it out. When we adopt the book of Hebrews directly into so-called, well, let's just say Gentile post-Jesus on the cross Christian theology, and say that these verses and whatnot from Hebrews apply directly to our lives, now that's problematic, because it's a letter to the Hebrews and it's their family issue of them working this out. Gentiles are looking on the outside, looking in. So let's say I'm a kid and I'm adopted. I'm a kid from Africa. I'm adopted by, a family in Britain. When I come to Britain to live with my new family as a child, my parents have a history. They have a family lineage, an ancestry that I was not a part of. I am now their family, but I had a totally different backstory than their ancestry. My ancestry is something totally different, but I am in their family now. And their family history is totally different from mine, from Africa. That is the situation that's going on here as far as Gentiles looking in on the book of Hebrews. Now, the book of James is also the same way. The book of James is addressed to the 12 tribes of Israel, the Hebrews. In James, it's a similar situation. It's an internal Hebrew thing. There's Hebrew people that like Jesus, and there's the Hebrew people that like the law, and the law Hebrews are persecuting the Jesus Hebrews. And it's the same thing. James makes the argument that the law is no longer needed to be followed. It's been shown to be insufficient, as Paul says, and now we're doing freedom in Christ. So stick with that. Endure the persecution. Stick with it. You're on the right track. Okay. How does it go off the rails when we apply, say, the book of Hebrews to our Gentile, quote unquote, Christian lives today? Well, there's the verse that's says, do not forsake the gathering of the brethren, etc., etc. That Christians if you've been in church for very long, you know that Christians use this verse to say that you should go to church and not miss church. That would be a Gentile application to a letter that was written to Hebrews. So why was it written to them and it's not for us? To them, under a persecution, they needed encouragement. They needed to stick together. They needed to circle the wagons on the Jesus freedom idea to withstand the persecution of the people that wanted them to fall back into following the law. They needed that. They needed to gather. This is an agricultural community where people are pretty separated. When they come together, when they used to come together under the law system, it was the synagogues, and then that was just carried over to be gatherings of Jesus-liking Hebrew people. It's just a carryover. They just kept the community going and just made it about Jesus and not about the law anymore. So freedom in Christ versus being under the law. And then it became eventually what we know as the Christian church, whatever. But it's just a gathering of people that are just following this thing that God's doing. So it was to them to not give up gathering together because they needed each other. They needed to be together in that persecuted time. So for Gentile Christians or even Hebrew Christians today to guilt each other about not showing up to church using this verse in Hebrews is just bad. And people know this. People know when theology is not good, and it's just not good for anybody. So I'm doing this work so that we can grapple with these things and try to be more accurate. I'm not a gatekeeper of theology. I don't have all the answers. I could be wrong. I'm open to suggestion, I hope. But let's discuss it and let's grapple with it, and hopefully we can come to better conclusions. So that is an overview of the book of Hebrews. And maybe one day I'll figure out a way where we can get into the book of Hebrews in detail, because it's awesome to look at it as an adopted person into this family that's having an issue. This is interesting because this is our family now. This is our family line, and I'm interested in it, even if it's not my background that is being dealt with here. So, okay, I will see you next time.